Boston, Andrea Mitchell has questions now for the candidates, starting with Iran.
Thank you, Lester. Senator Sanders, the nuclear deal is now in force. Iran is getting its billions of dollars. Several Americans who had been held are now going to be heading home. The president said today it's a good day for diplomacy. Is it time now to restore diplomatic relations for the first time since 1979 and actually reopen a U.S. embassy in Tehran?
I think what we have got to do is move as aggressively as we can to normalize relations with Iran, understanding that Iran's behavior in so many ways is something that we disagree with. Their support for terrorism, the anti-American rhetoric that we're hearing from some of their leadership is something that is not acceptable. On the other hand, the fact that we managed to reach an agreement, something that I very strongly supported, that prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and that we did that without going to war, and that I believe we're seeing a thaw in our relationships with Iran is a very positive step. So if your question is, do I want to see that relationship become more positive in the future? Yes. Can I tell you that we should open an embassy in Tehran tomorrow? No, I don't think we should. But I think the goal has got to be, as we have done with Cuba, to move and warm relations with a very powerful and important country in this world.
Your response, Secretary Clinton.
Well, I'm very proud of the Iran nuclear agreement. I was very pleased to be part of what the president put into action when he took office. I was responsible for getting those sanctions imposed, which put the pressure on Iran that brought them to the negotiating table, which resulted in this agreement. And so they have been, so far, following their requirements under the agreement. But I think we still have to carefully watch them. We've had one good day over 36 years, and I think we need more good days before we move more rapidly toward any kind of normalization. And we have to be sure that they are truly going to implement the agreement, and then we have to go after them on a lot of their other bad behavior in the region, which is causing enormous problems in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and elsewhere.
Well, you mentioned Syria. Let me ask you about Syria, all of you. Let's turn to Syria, the civil war that has been raging there. Are there any circumstances in which you could see deploying significant numbers of ground forces in Syria, not just special forces, special operators, but significant ground forces to combat ISIS in a direct combat role? Let me start with you, Secretary Clinton.
Absolutely not. I have a three-point plan that does not include American ground forces. It includes the United States leading an air coalition, which is what we are doing, supporting fighters on the ground, the Iraqi army, which is beginning to show more ability, the Sunni fighters that we are now helping to reconstitute, and Kurdish fighters on both sides of the border. I think we also have to try to disrupt their supply chain of foreign fighters and foreign money, and we do have to contest them in online space. So I'm very committed to both going after ISIS, but also supporting what Secretary Kerry is doing to try to move on a political, diplomatic course to try to begin to slow down and hopefully end the carnage in Syria, which is the root of so many of the problems that we see in the region and beyond.
Senator Sanders, ground forces, yes or no?
As everybody here knows, this is an incredibly complicated and difficult issue, and I applaud. I know President Obama has been getting a lot of criticism on this. I think he is doing the right thing. What the nightmare is, which many of my Republican colleagues appear to want, is to not have learned the lesson of Iraq, to get American young men and women involved in perpetual warfare in the quagmire of Syria and the Middle East would be an unmitigated disaster that, as president, I will do everything in my power to avoid.
Andrea,
we should learn from King Abdullah of Jordan, one of the few heroes in a very unheroic place. And what Abdullah said is this is a war for the soul of Islam, and that Muslim troops should be on the ground with our support and the support of other major countries. That is how we destroy ISIS, not with American troops in perpetual warfare.
Governor O'Malley.
Thank you. Andrea, governors have led us to victory in 2 world wars by doing what America does best, and that is by joining forces with others, by acting in coalition. And I believe that President Obama is doing the right thing in this case. We need to learn the lessons from the past. We do need to provide the special ops advisors. We do need to provide the technical support. But over the long term, we need to develop new alliances. We need a much more proactive national security strategy that reduces these threats before they rise to a level where it feels like we need to pull for a division of Marines. And I also want to add one other thing here. I appreciate the fact that in our debate, we don't use the term you hear Republicans throwing around, trying to look all bravado and macho, sending other kids into combat. They keep using the term boots on the ground. A woman in Burlington, Iowa said to me, Governor, when you're with your colleagues, please don't refer to my son, who has served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, as a pair of boots on the ground. We need to be mindful of learning the lessons of the past.
I have a question for Senator Sanders. Did the policies of the Obama administration, in which Secretary Clinton, of course, was a part, create a vacuum in Iraq and Syria that helped ISIS grow?
No, I think the vacuum was created by the disastrous war in Iraq, which I vigorously opposed. Not only did I vote against it, I helped lead the opposition. And what happened there is, yeah, it's easy to get rid of a 2-bit dictator like Saddam Hussein, but there wasn't the kind of thought as to what happens the day after you get him and what kind of political vacuum occurs and who rises up. Groups like ISIS. So I think that President Obama made a promise to the American people when he ran. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do my best to bring American troops home. And I supported what he did. Our job is to train and provide military support for Muslim countries in the area who are prepared to take on ISIS. And one point I want to make here that is not made very often. You have incredibly wealthy countries in that region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Qatar. Qatar happens to be the largest, wealthiest country per capita in the world. They have got to start putting in some skin in the game and not just ask the United States to do it.
Secretary Clinton, I want to talk to you about red lines because former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said in a recent interview that President Obama's decision to stand down on planned missile strikes against Damascus after Assad had used chemical weapons hurt the president's credibility. Should the president have stuck to his red line once he drew it?
Look, I think that the president's decision to go after the chemical weapons, once there was a potential opportunity to build on when the Russians opened that door, resulted in a very positive outcome. We were able to get the chemical weapons out. I know from my own experience as Secretary of State that we were deeply worried about Assad's forces using chemical weapons because it would have had not only a horrific effect on people in Syria, but it could very well have affected the surrounding states, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Turkey. So getting those chemical weapons out was a big deal.
Should he have stuck to his line? Did it hurt U.S. credibility?
I think as Commander-in-Chief, you've got to constantly be evaluating the decisions you have to make. I know a little bit about this, having spent many hours in the Situation Room advising President Obama. And I want to just add to something that Senator Sanders said. The United States had a very big interest in trying to help stabilize the region. If there is any blame to be spread around, it starts with the Prime Minister of Iraq, who sectarianized his military, setting Shia against Sunni. It is amplified by Assad, who has waged one of the bloodiest, most terrible attacks on his own people, 250,000 plus dead, millions fleeing, causing this vacuum that has been filled, unfortunately, by terrorist groups, including ISIS. So I think we are in the midst of great turmoil in this region. We have a proxy conflict going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran. You know, one of the criticisms I've had of Senator Sanders is his suggestion that, you know, Iranian troops be used to try to end the war in Syria and go after ISIS, which I don't think would be a good idea.
Senator,
but overall, a lot of the forces at work in the region are ones that we cannot directly influence, but we can try to bring more help to the
what happens next.
Where Secretary Clinton and I agree with most of what she said. But where I think we do have an honest disagreement is that in the incredible quagmire of Syria, where it's hard to know who's fighting who, and if you give arms to this guy, it may end up in ISIS's hands the next day. We all know that. And we all know, no argument, the Secretary is absolutely right. Assad is a butcher of his own people, man using chemical weapons against his own people. This is beyond disgusting. But I think in terms of our priorities in the region, our first priority must be the destruction of ISIS. Our second priority must be getting rid of Assad through some political settlement, working with Iran, working with Russia. But the immediate task is to bring all interests together who want to destroy ISIS, including Russia, including Iran, including our Muslim allies, to make that the major priority.
But in all of that, Senator and Secretary, I think we're leaving out something very important here. And that is that we still don't have the human intelligence, overt in terms of diplomatic intelligence or covert, to understand even what the heck happens as the secondary and tertiary effects of some of these things. We are walking through this region, Andrea, without the human intelligence that we need. And we need to make a renewed investment as a country into bringing up a new generation of foreign service officers and bringing up a new generation of business people and in actually understanding and having relationships in these places so we have a better sense of what the heck happens after a dictator topples and can take action to prevent another safe haven and another iteration of terror.
Your time is up.
Yes. Senator Sanders mentioned Russia a moment ago. Secretary Clinton, you famously handed Russia's foreign minister a reset button in 2009. Since then, Russia has annexed Crimea, fomented a war in Ukraine, provided weapons that downed an airliner, and launched operations, as we've just discussed, to support Assad in Syria. As president, would you hand Vladimir Putin a reset button?
Well, it depends upon what I got for it. And I can tell you what we got in the first term. We got a New START treaty to reduce nuclear weapons between the United States and Russia. We got permission to resupply our troops in Afghanistan by traveling across Russia. We got Russia to sign on to our sanctions against Iran and other very important commitments. So, look, in diplomacy, you are always trying to see how you can figure out the interests of the other to see if there isn't some way you can advance your security and your values. When Putin came back in the fall of 2011, it was very clear he came back with a mission. And I began speaking out as soon as that happened because there were some fraudulent elections held and Russians poured out into the streets to demand their freedom, and he cracked down and, in fact, accused me of fomenting it. So we now know that he has a mixed record, to say the least, and we have to figure out how to deal with him.
What's your relationship with him?
Well, my relationship with him, it's interesting. It's one, I think, of respect. We've had some very tough dealings with one another, and I know that he's someone that you have to continually stand up to because, like many bullies, he is somebody who will take as much as he possibly can unless you do. And we need to get the Europeans to be more willing to stand up. I was pleased they put sanctions on after Crimea and eastern Ukraine and the downing of the airliner, but we've got to be more united in preventing Putin from taking a more aggressive stance in Europe and the Middle East.
We want to turn right now to the issue of balancing national security concerns with the privacy rights of Americans. That brings us to YouTube and this question.
Hi, my name is Marquez Brownlee, and I've been making YouTube videos about electronics and gadgets for the past 7 years. I think America's future success is tied to getting all kinds of tech right. Tech companies are responsible for the encryption technology to protect personal data, but the government wants a back door into that information. So do you think it's possible to find common ground, and where do you stand on privacy versus security?
So, Governor O'Malley.
Thank you. I believe whether it's a back door or a front door, that the American principle of law should still hold, that our federal government should have to get a warrant, whether they want to come through your back door or your front door. And I also agree, Lester, with Benjamin Franklin, who said no people should ever give up their privacy or their freedoms in a promise for security. So we're a collaborative people. We need collaborative leadership here with Silicon Valley and other bright people in my own state of Maryland, around NSA, that can actually figure this out. But there are certain immutable principles that will not become antique things in our country so long as we defend our country and its values and its freedoms. And one of those things is our right to be secure in our homes and our right to expect that our federal government should have to get a warrant. I also want to say that while we've made some progress on the Patriot Act, I do believe that we need an adversarial court system there. We need a public advocate. We need to develop jurisprudence so that we can develop a body of law that protects the privacy of Americans in the information and digital age.
That's time. You have all talked about what you would do fighting ISIS over there, but we've been hit in this country by homegrown terrorists, from Chattanooga to San Bernardino. The recent shooting of a police officer in Philadelphia. How are you going to fight lone wolves here, Senator
Lester,
Sanders?
year in and year out, I was the leader of the U.S.
That's a question, Senator Sanders. I wasn't clear. I apologize.
Okay. I just wanted to add, in the previous question, I voted against the USA Patriot Act for many of the reasons that Governor O'Malley mentioned. But it is not only the government that we have to worry about, it is private corporations. You would all be amazed, or maybe not, about the amount of information private companies and the government has in terms of the websites that you access, the products that you buy, where you are this very moment. And it is very clear to me that public policy has not caught up with the explosion of technology. So, yes, we have to work with Silicon Valley to make sure that we do not allow ISIS to transmit information.
But in terms of lone wolves, the threat,
right. What we have got to do there is, among other things, as I was just saying, have Silicon Valley help us to make sure that information being transmitted through the Internet or in other ways by ISIS is, in fact, discovered. But I do believe we can do that without violating the constitutional and privacy rights of the American people.
We have to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to get to some of the burning questions these candidates have yet to answer. We're really eager to talk about.